want to speak from two different passages tonight, and I want to read them really quickly and then pray and then jump right into it. And I spoke for 7 minutes. We did a 4 for 7 a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to be expanding. This is going to be about a 30-minute version of that message because it's really what God's been speaking to me about this year. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 24, it's a story where Peter walks on water, and this is what it says. It says, after Jesus had dismissed his disciples, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. So then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately then, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And then they climbed back in the boat together. The wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And the second passage is 3 verses. In Mark chapter 8, verse 34, then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their own soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" I wanted to talk about this first passage first, in Matthew chapter 14, and it's so interesting to me because so many times I've read this scripture and this story, and I've always thought that it was about Peter's lack of faith. And it was kind of like, hey, Peter, if you just had some more faith, you could have kept walking on water. But what's funny is he actually walked on water. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing. And I feel like it's so easy to criticize people from the sidelines. And so often we get into this place that we're in our comfort zone and in our safety net, and we can easily criticize people that are playing in the game, and we're on the sidelines in our place of comfort. And what I love about this is that Peter actually steps out in faith, steps onto the water. And you know what? Jesus, it was actually not even about the water, because Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Come to me." He didn't say, "Hey, I'm going to show you how to do a miracle. You're going to walk on water tonight, and this is how it's going to go." It was literally about Peter going to Jesus. And this is a great example to me and a demonstration of our walk with God and this journey we call life. God is always going to be speaking. God is always going to be calling us somewhere. And it's really up to us if we want to respond to that call, if we want to actually take a risk and step out. And you know what's interesting? One of my best friends in the world, his name is Micah, and he's got these 3 kids. They're the cutest kids ever, but they're all under 3 years old. They were busy, like they've been married like 4 years, already have 3 kids. I mean, they're just getting after it. And, hello. And so they're married, it's fine. So, I love kids. I'm glad I don't have them, because whenever I go to his house, I get anxiety, literally. He's always teaching one kid how to walk. He's potty training another kid, and there's just screaming and crying, and it's like I go over there for 30 minutes, I need to walk. I need fresh air. I need to go for a break. I just can't do it. But he's got this, his son is like a year old. His name is Roman, and Roman is learning how to walk. And so he was a few months ago, and every time Micah would set him down on his feet, and he would just say, "Hey, come to dad. Come to dad." And so Roman's over there wobbling with his legs, falling down every time, and he puts him back up. He has this big grin on his face, and he's like running to his dad. And you know what's interesting is Roman has no clue that his dad is teaching him to walk. He has no idea that he's trying to learn how to walk. He's just focused on his dad. He's just focused on going to dad. And I think in this life, so many times we're so focused on all of these tasks and all of these things that we're trying to do, when the reality is, when we just focus our eyes on what God is calling us to do, we focus our heart on Jesus, we start to naturally do things we never thought possible. because we realized that in this story, I grew up a pastor's kid. My dad's dad was a pastor. He's a pastor. And I was like not even trying to be a pastor, but I grew up learning this story. So I thought, Dad, I'm going to go walk on water. I would jump out in the pool and think I have faith for this. Didn't work. I would sink. Because I realized that this story is not about the water. This isn't about if you have faith, you can walk on water. This story is about, metaphorically, that if you focus your eyes on Jesus and respond to when he calls, it's going to be amazing when you look back and you say, how was it even possible? How did I do this? And you realize that it wasn't you. It was God shining his light through you that actually was able to accomplish these things. You know, what I also see in this story is that as soon as Peter began to focus on the distractions around him, he focused on the waves, he focused on the wind, which were really normal things. I mean, if you've ever been out on a boat at night into the water, there's going to be wind and there's going to be waves. So this is a normal part of the ocean. But when his eyes and his heart became fixated on the distractions around him, and how is this possible? How am I walking on water? These waves are crashing up. He begins to sink. And immediately it says, Jesus stretched out his hand, lifted him back up onto the water, so that they could be walking back to the boat. And he said, hey, you have little faith. Like, where did your faith go? And what's so interesting to me is that it wasn't Jesus saying, hey, kicking him while he's down, you have little faith, like, figure it out, swim back. No, the first thing he does is he reaches out his hand and extends his hand and picks him back up on his feet so that he can start walking on water again. And I think as a church, that's the type of people that we need to be. Is that we don't pick out somebody else's flaws and we're not criticizing other people, but rather we're people that lift out our arms to pick somebody else up when they fall. And, we don't have time. If our eyes are fixated on Jesus and we're responding to when he's calling us, we don't have time to look to our left and to our right, criticizing our friends, comparing our life to their life, our call to their call. Are they doing their stuff perfectly? Are they figuring it out? We don't have time for that. The only time we're going to look to the right is if somebody's struggling, and we're going to lift them right back up. We're going to remind them of their calling. We're going to remind them of what God spoke over their life, like who they are. I know for me, I've been so blessed to have so many friends in my life along the way that have really reminded me of who I am, that have reminded me of my calling. And without that, I wouldn't be here right now. I want to tell you, I was going to go back to this, but there's a study that Tony Campolo did. He wrote a book, and it was a really amazing book. And there was a study. He asked people that were in their 80s and 90s, 1,000 people in their 80s and 90s, men and women from all over the world. And he asked them a very simple question. If you could do life all over again, what would you do differently? And these were not all Christians. It was all different faiths, all different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities. And the overwhelming response was very similar. And he narrowed it down to the top three. And this is what he wrote down in his study. The top three things, if I could do it all over again, this is what I'd do. Number one, reflect more. Number two, take more risks. And number three, do things that live beyond myself. Reflect more, take more risks, and do things that live beyond myself. And as I reflect on this year and reflect on the last 7 years of what God has been doing in my life and what God has been showing me about who I am, I'm amazed at this journey because so often we act as if there's a destination that we're gonna get to that's gonna bring us peace or satisfaction or fulfillment or meaning. But I begin to realize that the destination is actually the journey that we're on. That every single day we get to choose to have joy, choose to forgive, choose to show love and kindness and graciousness. And so as I reflect on this year and I look at the amazing things that we've done over the past 7 years with generosity.org, it's pretty inspiring to me, but it didn't always start that way. And I remember in 2010, I was 23 years old, and we held our second Night of Generosity event, which was simply a big fundraising gala that we were going to raise a bunch of money and send it off to build some wells. And I went just a month before this time to 5 different countries in Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia and Liberia, Tanzania, Uganda. And in each country, we filmed a story of a community that needed water. And so it was on this night, we were going to show these 5 different videos, and we were going to open it up for the very first time and see if does anyone want to come up and fund this well. And it sounded like a great idea in my heart. I was like, okay, this is going to be amazing. People are going to come up. We're going to have these videos. So we started showing them all across the room. And as I was getting ready to like go up and do my first speech ever, I got nervous. I'm like, this is not that event. Like, no one's going to come up and give towards these wells. Like, nobody's going to do it. They just want to have their, wine. They just want to have their coffee. They just want to chill. They don't want to come up and give tonight. I was nervous. But the guy, one of my best friends at the time, Michael Muniz, who worked with me at Generosity, he pulled me aside and he said, Jordan, like, you have to go up there and do that. Like, this is what tonight is about. This is what this is about. We're going to see these 5 communities and more get clean water because of this night. And I literally was talking himself out of it. I was like, no, we'll do it a different way. Like, we're going to figure this out. Like, it's okay. And he's like, you have to. You got to do it. So I just trusted him. I was like, all right, man, I'm going to do it. So I gave this talk, and I told some friends, I was like, if nobody comes up, just act like you're going to do it well, because I don't want to embarrass myself up here. I was like, bro, he's like, my friend has $0 in the bank account, but act like you're going to give $3,000 tonight. Like, just come on up. I was like, we got to do this. And so I shared these 5 stories from these different communities, and we opened it up. And I was just blown away that there was probably 150, 200 people there, and so many of them came up to the front that by the end of the night, we raised over $50,000. And we were able to build not just 5 wells, but about 12 wells in one night. And that's really what sparked this whole night of generosity and what we do. And I couldn't help but think to myself that if I just allowed my fear to take over, if I allowed the thing that was really distracting me was what are people going to think about me? Like, what are people going to say? Are they going to respond? Am I going to look like an idiot? If I allowed those feelings to become my actions, there would be 12 communities today that do not have clean water. And it was in that moment of sacrifice and in that moment of trust, hey, God, you've called me out here onto the water, God. You've called me out into this unknown, scary, risky place that I don't know what the answer is going to be. I don't know what the result is, but I'm going to trust you because it was you that put this in my heart, God. And when we step out in faith, we begin to see miracles happen. So many of us ask for miracles, but we don't live a life that allows God to perform miracles in our life. Because if we can figure it out on our own, if we could do it on our own talents and gifts, where is God in that? Where the miracle happens is in the trust. It's in the margin. It's in the unknown. It's in the place that we don't really have it all figured out, but we're going to trust God with it. And I'm also grateful for friends like Michael that reminded me of what God told me, reminded me of what God put in my heart. Because without friends that are there to lift you up when you start to doubt yourself, that are there to remind you of what God spoke over your life, and remind you of who you are, without friends that are there to just call you out, hold you accountable, we're easily susceptible to just sinking. And so we need to be, as a community, imagine what could be possible if we were a community that didn't condemn each other. Just because we have a heart for the lost doesn't mean we have to be angry with the lost, doesn't mean we have to be condemning, judging. If we actually live our life in a way that's building people up every single day, that we're finding people to encourage their gifts and their strengths and their talents, what type of community might we have here? What can we accomplish together as a church? I believe that there are so many things in our city, and we can be the answer to those things if we are coming together, united, encouraging each other, and we get to solve these problems together. When we went to one of those communities that we actually funded that night was in Ethiopia, and I'll never forget this story. This is probably one of my top 5 moments in my life. We get to Ethiopia, and we went to go visit a community that we just previously funded this well for at this night that we almost didn't raise the money because I almost didn't ask people to give. And we went to this community, and I got to see firsthand what the clean water looked like in their village and what it meant for them. And so we pulled up to this community. It was like nothing else I'd been to before. And it almost looked like we drove into the Grand Canyon, like these huge, high, rocky mountains, deep valleys, completely dry, all rock and dirt, and like very little green. And we get into this community, and we start, and it was like nobody was there. So at first I'm like, I don't know if we're in the right place. Like, can you guys check the GPS coordinates? Like, there was no street signs or anything, so I'm like, I'm not really sure where we are. Then all of a sudden we start hearing some rocks kind of fall down the mountain a little bit, and I look back behind me, and I see 1,000 people literally kind of running down this mountain towards our car. So at first, I'm a little hesitant because I'm in a new place, and I'm like, wait a second, are we in the right village here? I mean, these guys are coming fast, like they are charging. And then like after a little while longer, they start to get closer, and the driver's like, Jordan, these are the school kids that are coming to celebrate with you because now they have clean water for the first time. And so we started seeing these 1,000 kids come down. They were holding signs in the air, like never seen this before in my life. Like this wasn't like at a Clippers game where you're cheering on Blake Griffin. I mean, they were holding signs. It was like the water load of our mother is now reduced. One side simply just said water. I mean, he spelled it wrong, but I knew where his heart was, you know? And then another sign just said like, I mean, it was amazing, the signs that they would hold up to come down. And so I've never seen a celebration like this. I have a video for it, but it's not here tonight, so you have to check it out on the website. Shameless plug for Anna. No, I'm kidding. So, but it's actually a really, really beautiful story, and it was like one of the biggest gatherings of people I've ever seen live. Like it was over 5,000 people that from all the surrounding communities came out. This one 72-year-old woman in the village, you could tell, I mean, she's 72 years old, living in the direct sunlight. You could tell she's lived a lot of life. She had a hunched back, and she started telling this story, and she was saying, for all of my life, I have walked, in front of all these people, she was saying this. She was like, for all my life, I've walked miles and miles to get water for my family. And this, it was taking me hours every single day. And so I would carry this 45-pound clay jar on my back so that I only could do one trip per day. And she began to cry, and she said, you've literally taken the weight off of my back. And you see, I was never educated, but now my kids, they have that chance. And it's stories like that that remind me of why we do what we do. It reminds me of why we actually have to position our life and trust God with the unknown, because it is in the unknown where the miracles are performed and where the lives are changed. And if I would have just succumbed to fear, we would have not seen that story become reality. How many stories like that in our life that we don't even know didn't happen because we didn't answer the call that God put on our life? How many of those possibilities are there around us in our neighborhood, in our families, and in our communities? How many people could we be impacting if we just trusted God with what he's calling us to do? You know, and then the next passage of scripture that I was reading was in Mark chapter 8, verse 34. And it says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their own soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? What I love and what this scripture says to me is when Jesus is talking about taking up our cross and following him, he's essentially talking about taking up our purpose and following him. Because the cross represented the purpose of Jesus. Jesus came to earth to die on a cross, to pay a price for our sin, for our shortcomings, so that we could be united with God, so that we could have relationship with God. So when Jesus is saying, drop everything, pick up your cross, pick up your purpose and follow me. Pick up the thing that I've spoken to you about, that I've put in your heart, that only you're positioned to do. Don't worry about what he's doing or she's doing. Don't worry about what they say, because I've put this in your heart. Don't let people talk you out of what God already spoke to you about, because they didn't hear what you heard, because God spoke it to you. God didn't speak it to them. And so in this moment, we see Jesus responding to the call of God on his life. And so he's speaking to his disciples and essentially saying, deny yourself. If you want to be a Christian, he's essentially saying, come and die. Come and deny yourself. Come and let go of who you are. Because, and at first for a second, I'm like, wait a second, deny myself, but God, you made me. Like, wait a second, what does this exactly mean? And it's saying essentially what God is saying in this right here is, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about what you can do with your talents. That's awesome. Your achievements, your awards, the money that you've made. But at the end of the day, it leaves us still wanting more. When is enough? When is enough enough? How much more money can I make? How much bigger house can I get? How much of a nicer picture can I get? At the end of the day, no matter how much money we have, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not what our soul is craving. That's not what our heart is desiring. That's not what brings meaning to our life. And so what God is saying in this, what Jesus is telling us in this moment is, hey, deny yourself. Not your dreams and your desires in your heart, but those things that when you're making it about you, oh, I can do this, I can figure this out, I have this talent, look at who I am, this is my platform, this is what I'm building. Forget all of that, because where God shines is in the broken places of our heart, in the place where we actually say, God, not my will, but your will. Like, this is not about me. Shine through me and let's let other people see the light of Jesus in us, not just our own skills and our own talents. And at the end of the day, in Mark chapter 14, just six chapters later, Jesus, what I love about this is Jesus is obviously God and he's also man. He's 100% God, 100% man. How is that possible? This is what it says. It says, the disciples came with him to an area called Gethsemane. Jesus told his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him. He plunged into a sinkhole of dreadful agony. And then he told them, I feel bad enough right now to die. Stay here and keep vigil with me. Going a little ahead, he fell to the ground and he prayed for a way out. Papa, Father, you can't you? Get me out of this? Take this cup away from me. But please, not what I want, God. What do you want? Jesus in this passage is revealing his humanity. That while he is God, he is still man. He is wrestling with God in this story. He's wrestling with his calling, his purpose. God, if there's another way, I mean, not my will, your will, God, but if there is another way, then I'd like to know about it. And I feel like so many of us can relate to this moment where we know God has a plan for our life. We know that he's calling us to something great. We know he's calling us to do amazing things, but we're a little bit afraid of what it takes to get there. And in this moment, we're realizing, hey, this cross that God is asking us to carry, it might be heavy. It might feel heavy, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't given you the strength to carry it. God will never give you something you cannot handle, you cannot carry. And if we're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, it's probably because there's something else in our life that we need to let go of. We got to let go of something to pick something new up. And year after year and season after season in my life, I'm constantly dealing with what to pick up and what to put down. But instead of focusing on what I'm giving up, I got to focus on what I'm picking up. What is the thing that God is asking you to carry in this season? What is your purpose? What is God asking you to do? The more we actually begin to create margin in our life, to hear from God, to reflect, to pray, to be self-aware in every season, we actually begin to hear the voice of God in our life. We begin to read scripture, we begin to worship when it doesn't make sense. But God, this has been a rough week, but I'm still worshiping because my faith is not dictated by my circumstances, but rather my circumstances are driven by my faith. I really believe that we can have faith for this moment. There's something that God's put in your heart that you want to see done, that you want to get done and want to get accomplished. And there's a reason that you were created specifically the way that you were, with the family that you have, with the friends that you have, and the skills that you have. Because God is going to put all of that together, and he's designed something beautiful for you to create in your world and with people around you. I can't reach those people, but you can. And so God is wanting all of us to pick up our purpose, to pick up our calling, to let go of sin, to let go of people that are holding us back, let go of people that are just critical and critical spirits in your life, or it could even be a job. For 7 years, I've been the executive director of generosity.org, and it's been a passion of mine for so long. It's been the thing that I would always talk about. Any platform I'd be on, I'd talk about generosity. I guess I'm still doing it. But this year, I felt like God was asking me to change my role and lay that down. Not because I'm not capable of it. He knows I'm capable. I know I'm capable. I've been doing it. But because what God has for me is so much bigger. And it's not tied to the thing that I'm doing. It's tied to the God inside of me that's speaking to me. And so when he's saying, hey, Jordan, I need you to lay this down, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be a spokesperson, an advocate, someone who's passionate about ending the water crisis. But my life's mission isn't clean water. My life's mission is to position my heart to hear from God, so that when he calls, I respond. If that takes the shape of leading an organization, building wells, that's what I'm going to do. If it's running operations behind the scenes at church, I'm going to do that. But wherever God is calling me to go, I'm going to respond. And so in this moment, my identity for 7 years has been built as he's the water boy. He's generosity.org. He's got to talk about water. But I got to be willing to lay that same thing down, to pick up something new that God's bringing into my life. And what's crazy is that I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what's next. I have no idea how this is going to unfold. But I just trust God with every minute, with every circumstance, and every situation. And that's how I know God's in it, is because I'm the least qualified. How is it? I used to literally disqualify myself from being in ministry. That's just my parents' thing. That's our family thing. Like, I'm going to be attending church, but I'm not positioned to be speaking at church because I'm so flawed. I'm so imperfect. I'm not living a lifestyle that's perfect. And I'll never forget it, because Julian, one of my closest friends, became one of my closest friends this year. Literally a few months ago, was one of those people that had to remind me of my calling. And I get a little bit emotional because I'm passionate about this. And I don't want you to miss this moment either. And I told him, I was like, I don't know, man. And he's like, do you feel like you're called to be here? Do you feel like that? I was like, I don't know, man. I got generosity to deal with. I got this. I got a lot of things going on. We just got this investor. We're launching a business. We have all these things going on right now. I don't know how it's going to work. And he's like, Jordan, you're trying to solve all these problems and figure everything out. The first thing you got to do is decide if you want to answer the call or not. He's like, if you've been on a lot of conference calls in your life, and the first thing you got to do is get on the call. The first thing you got to do is answer the call. Then you can figure out what you're going to talk about. And I'll never forget that, because that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is that Julian has been someone in my life as a friend that has reminded me of who I am, reminded me of my calling in my life. And there's been a lot of people on this journey with me that have done that. And I hope I can be that to other people as well, that when they might be disqualifying themselves from the thing that God is calling them to do, that I might actually remind them of who they are. Not just affirm their negative thoughts. Not just be like, yeah, you should do whatever you feel. Because what we feel changes every single day. And if I just acted on my feelings every day, I might punch someone one day. I mean, I can't do that. We got to balance our feelings with the Word of God, because the only thing that is constant and consistent is Jesus. His character never changes. His personality never changes. So when we're unsure of what to do or how to act, we go back to the character of Jesus. And so it's in this moment that I want to give us an opportunity as the worship team comes back up, and I want to pray for some people tonight. And I actually was going to ask Julian in just a minute to come up here, and because he's someone that's spoken so much into my life, I believe Julian hears from God. I've met a lot of people in my life that claim to hear from God, but I know for a fact that Julian does. And it's impossible that when you're around him to not walk away encouraged by something. So many people in my life, my good friends, are like, man, Julian, he's just a guy that believes in you. And sometimes you need somebody to believe in you before you even believe it yourself. And just like the character of God, he believes in you before you believe in yourself. And I believe the closer we get with God, the longer we are on this walk with God, the longer and the deeper our relationship is with God, the more we realize how far we once were from God. And that's why we have to show grace to people. Because how can we be intimate with Jesus, the character of God, but yet be judgmental or condemning and not show grace? What I think is so interesting is that the Apostle Paul was first named Saul. He was like Hitler of his time. He was crucifying and killing Christians by the thousands. He was one of the greatest leaders of all time, just leading people in the wrong direction. And then he encountered the presence of God. And he encountered God himself, and his life changed and transformed and became named Paul instead of Saul, and he ended up writing 2/3 of the New Testament. Because God is not concerned with where you started, but rather where you finish. It doesn't matter where you came from and what mistakes that you made. It's what do we do from here? And there's 3 different parts. In 1 Corinthians 15:9, Paul describes himself as, I'm the least of the apostles. And it's interesting because it's kind of like a humble brag, like I'm the least of the top 12. You know what I mean? Like I'm still the top 12, but I'm the least of them. But then Ephesians 3:8, he goes, I'm the least of all God's people. And then a little bit later, 1 Timothy 1:15, he says, I'm the least of all sinners. I'm the worst sinner of all. It's the same guy. He wasn't talking about more things that he did, but the closer he was with God, the longer he was following God, the more he realized that, hey, I'm the worst sinner that there is. And I think some of us, the closer we get with God, and we can tend to start to judge people that aren't at the same level that we are. But I really believe that the closer we get with God, the more grace we should be showing to other people, because how undeserving am I to be on this platform? If you knew where I've been, the things that I've done, I'm so disqualified. But by the grace of God, he makes all things new.